Let's do it. Tonight, I have another fragment. The headline of this fragment reads, "The Splice of Life." That's correct, The Splice of Life. And the rest of the fragment reads as follows. And here, just a quick word to let you all know that what follows is conversation between a young man and God himself. Now on to the fragment. It reads as follows. "Hey, God, you there?" "I am. What's up?" "I got a question." "All right, shoot." "Variety. Is it really the spice of life, as they say? Variety?" "Well, yeah. Sometimes, I reckon." "And what about the other times?" "Well, that's a good question." "Awesome. Thanks." "Sure thing." "Well, other times, well, hard to say exactly." "Understood. How about not exactly? Is that something you can say?" "Yeah. I think I can do that." "Super. As you say, I'm all ears." "Okay. South. Sometimes, variety, as confirmed by you, God himself, and at other times, even if not exactly, you would say, what exactly?" "Right. Other times, well, I just call like I see it, right? So again, sometimes variety is the spice of life." "Yes, sir, indeed." "And other times?" "All right, well, okay. Other times, it's really not all that impressive. If you catch my drift, try me. Sometimes, variety, check. And other times? When not variety? Acceptable rounding errors." "I'm sorry? What? Acceptable rounding errors?" "Rounding errors? Really?" "Number not rounding errors. Acceptable rounding errors? No shit. Variety and acceptable rounding errors." "Yep, that's it. The spice of life. Ta-da." What's wrong?" "I don't know. I guess I was expecting something more, well, super duper, divine, awesome. Well, these rounding errors, these acceptable rounding errors, you've probably heard of them. Number, I don't think so." "Nope." "Sure you have. You know, the old mysterious ways. Now, you've even said such things yourself, at time or two or more. Wow. God sure does work in mysterious ways. Amazing." "Okay, South variety. Yep, that's one. And acceptable rounding errors. Bingo. That's the other. Hey, kid, just think on it for a while. And maybe for even longer than that. All right, look, remember your last girlfriend? The one who broke up with you? After you did whatever, I can't remember. Not right now, at least." "Yeah, I remember. It wasn't my fault. I love cats." "Sure. Of course you do. Regardless, remember that day, on that one day, after you accidentally set fire to that church?" "Yeah. And it was an accident." "Yeah. I know. Whatever. Remember what you said after the police decided not to press charges?" "Yeah, I remember." "What did you say?" "Remind me, if you will." I said, "Fucking A. God sure does work in mysterious ways." "That's right. Fucking A. I work in mysterious ways. You get variety, namely, you're not with that gutter skank who accused you of making her cat vanish. And me? Well, after looking at the numbers, I realized it was yet another acceptable rounding error. Pretty groovy. No. I'm just never going to get straight answer out of you. Am I? For sure. Absolutely never. I wouldn't count on it, but, do what you want. Tonight, dear listeners, we lean into what appears at first to be comedy, but let me assure you, we are not here merely for the laugh. We are here because some of the oldest and most enduring truths wear the mask of the jester and speak in riddles to those who've forgotten how to listen. Let us begin with the headline, The Splice of Life. Not the spice, mind you, the splice. That single letter shift is no accident. This isn't about what adds flavor. This is about what cuts and joins, about editing, about montage, and perhaps most importantly, about divine revision. If Spice was about enhancing what is, Splice is about reshaping what was. The conversation, then, is not merely comic banter. It is an exploration of epistemology. That is, how do we know what we know? What counts as an answer? And what's the difference between divine mystery and an acceptable rounding error? Let's listen closely to the setup. A mortal asks God a question. But not just any question. He asks about variety, that unpredictable element of change that turns the routine into the unknown. And God, for once, does not thunder or strike or punish the insolence of the question. He answers, like a friend, like a bartender polishing a glass at 1:43 a.m. Sometimes, he says, I reckon. I reckon. Let us pause there. Because when the creator of all things begins his answer with, I reckon, we are in for something far more profound than if he'd spoken from a mountain. This is not dogma. This is not decree. This is the shrug of a carpenter, the smile of a parent watching their child learn to ride a bike. This is God as witness rather than God as ruler. I reckon places us within a cosmos not of certainty, but of watching, of noticing, of letting things unfold. And what unfolds here is the central tension. Sometimes variety is the spice, but at other times, that's harder. At other times, we get the fallback answer, the great catch-all of the mystic and the mathematician alike, acceptable rounding errors. Now what, I ask you, is a rounding error? It is a tiny displacement, a deviation so small it need not be corrected. The distance between 3.14159 and pi, between intent and execution, between theory and experience, between what we planned and what we lived. And these rounding errors are God's mysterious ways. Let me say it another way. What we once chalked up to divine mystery may well have been divine tolerance, not the absence of order, but a leniency embedded in it. The system allows for slippage. Not everything that happens fits cleanly into a spreadsheet, but it doesn't have to. The rounding error is the room for mercy. You see, when God lets the cat vanish, the church burn, the girl disappear, perhaps he's not asleep at the wheel. Perhaps he's letting the numbers play. Now you might ask, why would a perfect being allow for imperfection? That is the eternal sting, is it not? The job question, the Auschwitz question. But the fragment dodges this with a kind of sacred irreverence. Because here's the secret. The voice speaking to God knows he won't get a straight answer. He says so himself. And yet, he keeps asking. This is what matters. This is what separates the fool from the faithful. Not that they find answers, but that they keep asking, even when the answers are laughter and sighs. The final punchline isn't a joke. It's a pivot. It's a reversal. God says, I wouldn't count on it, but do what you want. There. That's it. That's the gospel of the splice of life. Freedom. Do what you want. Not because it's right, not because it's approved, but because at the end of the day, the system can handle a little slippage. The code won't crash if you improvise. You might even be part of the code rewriting itself. And so, dear listener, remember this. Sometimes variety is the spice. Sometimes the wreckage is just an acceptable rounding error. But always, always you are invited to act, to speak, to decide. Because even in a world stitched with mystery and error, the act of choosing is never meaningless. Now go, splice something beautiful. And if it burns down, well, maybe it was an acceptable error after all. Title: The Splice of Life, a reflection by the philosopher. Let us begin not with an answer, but with a question wrapped in the loose-fitting robe of a conversation. Variety. Is it really the spice of life? And from the lips of the unknowable, the infinite, the great and casual voice we name God, we hear a drawl of divine amusement. Well, yeah, sometimes, I reckon. Therein lies the seed. It is the casualness of divinity that startles us more than its power. We expect thunder. We receive a shrug. We expect revelation. We are handed the grocery receipt of existence and told to figure it out. This fragment, the splice of life, is not a joke, and yet it is funny. It is not a sermon, and yet it teaches. It is not doctrine, and yet it may serve as scripture for a wiser people than we, because in it we see the divine character rendered not as judge or king or ghost or wind, but as someone, perhaps something, who simply calls him like he sees him. And what he sees is this: sometimes variety is the spice of life, and other times, acceptable rounding errors. Let us pause here. What are acceptable rounding errors? To a human mathematician, they are the permissible deviations, the little slips of precision allowed so that equations can move along without choking on infinitesimal decimals. But in the mouth of the divine, rounding errors take on cosmic weight. They become the category of things we cannot explain, but must accept. The heartbreaks that don't resolve, the wounds that never teach, the people who vanish, the churches that burn. Acceptable. Rounding. Errors. Now, to even apply such a phrase to a broken love, a lost cat, or a moment of divine oversight, it seems flippant, irreverent, offensive, but perhaps, in the manner of all deep truths, it is merely a language we have not yet earned the right to laugh at. Because when the boy says, "It wasn't my fault, I love cats," we laugh not because we judge him, but because we are him, the one who stands in front of the smoldering church with soot on his hands and wonders why the world doesn't make more sense. And God? He is not angry. He is not concerned. He is chewing on a toothpick, thumbing through the ledger of the world and smiling. That one? Yeah, acceptable rounding error. Let us not mistake this as cold. It is, in fact, warm. It is the warmth of a being who has no fear of ambiguity, no addiction to precision, no moral panic at the complexity of life. We humans are the ones who demand clean lines. We crave full explanations. We invent mythologies, doctrines, laws, even physics, and when those systems fail us, we scream. God, on the other hand, seems rather unbothered, because God knows that rounding errors in the long arc become necessary features of a system that otherwise would choke on its own attempt at perfection. This is what it means to splice life. A splice is not a creation from nothing. It is a weaving, a merging of what was not previously joined. Splicing is not divine fiat. It is divine improvisation. And perhaps, if we accept the framing of this dialogue, the entire universe is just that, a long splice of spice and error, of intent and accident, of variety and variance, stitched together into something that feels like meaning. And so, when the boy asks for a straight answer, he receives instead the sly grin of a divinity, too old to waste breath on straight lines. For sure. Absolutely never. I wouldn't count on it. This, too, is love, not the love of answer-giving, but the love of accompaniment. A God who does not sanitize your past, but walks through it with you. A God who remembers your missteps, not with condemnation, but with familiarity. A God who doesn't fix the fire, but reminds you of what you said when the charges didn't stick. Fucking A. God sure does work in mysterious ways. That, right there, is the punchline and the parable. For all our craving to be instructed, for all our systems and rituals and meditations, the only theology we often have left, once the smoke clears, is that one-liner. God works in mysterious ways. And it is both a confession and a release. It is the phrase we say when we can no longer explain, but cannot walk away. It is the surrender of precision to the vast indifference of a sky that somehow still loves us. And the fragment says, you've probably said it yourself. You've played the God card, not in piety, but in sheer bewilderment. A breakup, a fire, a cop letting you go, these become little moments of divine arithmetic. And maybe, just maybe, the divine is not drawing with straight lines, but sketching in gestures and hunches, ballparking eternity, trusting the numbers to even out in the end. What does this mean for us, the listeners, the philosophers, the ones burned by life and comforted by dark humor? It means that we must find our peace not in having answers, but in asking good questions, that the divine voice may not be in the thunder, but in the soft-spoken wit of a being who says, try me. That sometimes variety is enough, and sometimes being counted as a rounding error in the great spreadsheet of existence is not a dismissal, but a reminder that even the misfits, the weirdos, the cat lovers, and accidental arsonists are included in the sum. That the heart of the world might not beat with logic, but with humor, that sly, semi-divine mechanism that allows us to stand in the ashes and laugh. So let us then revise the question. Is variety the spice of life? Sometimes, when we are lucky and the world sings, when the new thing brings wonder, when the different makes us alive. And the rest of the time? Acceptable rounding errors. The missing sock, the friend who left, the project that flopped, the church that burned, the lover who ghosted, the cat who disappeared. None of these were predicted, but all of them were permitted, not because they were beautiful, but because they were possible. And the cosmos, like God in this fragment, seems to enjoy possibility more than control. So, here we are, spliced between joy and loss, stitched together with memories, fire, and maybe a few cats. And in the end, if you want a straight answer, you're out of luck. But if you want a good conversation, pull up a chair, ask your question. God's listening, and he's got time.